You're listening to Becoming an Expat, the ultimate threat to the mundane 9-to-5 life. If you want to live life on your terms, in your favorite place, keep listening. Your host is a paramedic turned author, entrepreneur, and international lifestyle expert, Shannon Enett.
Welcome back to Becoming an Expat. This next guest is a bit of a hybrid guest. She has experience living in a variety of countries, but she also is a roamer. You'll see more what I mean when we get into the interview. Her name is Lily Ann Fouts, and she's from all over, really. As a child, she was actually a fugitive and was raised in a variety of countries, including Mexico, which we'll get into here shortly. I'm really excited to share with you her story. She's an author of a new book called Live Like Local in Loja. So Lily, thank you so much for joining us. I'm looking forward to sharing your story with others.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, you've got one heck of a story from reading your recent release and then also perusing your website at lilyannfouts.com. I learned a lot about you. So if you could tell me a little bit, kind of a synopsis of your story, sort of how your relationship with Latin America began, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. I am what they call a third culture kid, which is somebody who has grown up outside of their passport country. And I grew up in Mexico. I was there for 5 years. And the way I became a third culture kid was essentially I was kidnapped and taken to Mexico with my younger sister. Now,
wow.
That's
not the average
horrible,
story.
Right?
Yeah. That does sound scary, but I know it's a little bit more complicated than that. Yeah.
My abductor was actually my mother, so it's not as horrible as it sounds. It was actually a good thing. I say it's the best thing that ever happened to me. Mm-hmm. A, because Mexico was an awesome place to grow up, and B, because I was taken away from an abusive situation. My father had gained custody of us in court through lies and unethical means, and my mom really tried hard to get us back legally, and that didn't work out, so we just became fugitives. So that's how my relationship with Latin America began.
So as you guys became fugitives, were you bouncing around the States quite a bit before you hit Mexico? What was the anxiety level like as a young child?
Well, yeah, we did bounce around quite a bit. We were in the south part of the U.S. for a while, bounced around, and my mom kind of had it in her mind to go to Mexico, but was a little bit chicken about it.
Sure, that's a lot.
It's a huge step to take.
Yeah,
but we had some Mexican friends that helped us get down there and get settled initially, but once we were down there, we were pretty much on our own. And
right.
My mom didn't speak Spanish at that point, so we kind of had to do everything from scratch. And we lived in, we did not live in a touristy expat community, anything like that. We were in a very average Mexican neighborhood. We lived in various places down there, but we were always in just a regular Mexican neighborhood. With regular Mexican friends, and my sister and I learned to speak Spanish just like Mexicans. You couldn't tell the difference on the phone. So
wow, the phone is difficult, for at least for me, as a second language, trying to understand without any body, visual cues, and they go so fast, and it's harder to hear. That's definitely been a huge challenge for me. So your mom brings you, and did you have siblings?
Yeah, I had one sister, a younger sister.
And how old were you two when this all began?
6 and 8.
Wow. And so she's running around, making it to Mexico, trying to kind of save your guys' mental and physical well-being, and of course her attachment to you. As a single mom in a new country with a language barrier, how did she support you guys?
Well, it was a real challenge at first. Like I said, we had some friends that helped us at first, and we moved in with a family, and my mom immediately set about to learning Spanish. We would go to the plaza, and she would just talk to the vendors and talk to the people walking by, talk to the kids when they got out of school. She had a notebook, and she was just writing down words and, what's that, learning as much as much as she could, as fast as she could. my sister and I basically learned Spanish by just going out and playing with the other kids and picked it up that way. But to support us, my mom is in the medical field. She's a nurse, and she also was a massage therapist at that time. So she did massages, gave people treatments and, back adjustments and, did medical work in exchange for an income. And that's the primary way we were supported. There was one period of time where, we were still kind of learning the language where she would make bread, and we actually went door to door selling bread, which might have looked really weird to a Mexican, seeing these three American ladies,
You're right.
a mom and two little girls walking around selling bread. But that's what we did temporarily at one point to just supplement our income. But we did pretty well with her working as a massage therapist. Once people began to see what she could do, she began to build up quite a client base. And at one point, she was working in a very wealthy club there in a city called Uruapan down in the state of Michoacan. She was working in a racquetball club where they have this huge Olympic-sized swimming pool and tennis courts and racquetball courts and different things. And very wealthy people were members there, and she would give massages there.
What town did you guys start out in?
We started out in this little tiny town called Pajacuaran. The whole time we lived there, we were in the state of Michoacan, which is now kind of on the news for the drug activities. Unfortunately, it's really sad what's going on now. But at the time, that wasn't a problem. We felt very safe there, actually. But we did move around, especially at first. We had reports at various times that we were on the run of people looking for us. So we kind of had to keep a low profile and be careful. And if somebody came around with our picture, we would need to move. And that did happen at one point. So
keep a low profile as three gringas in these small towns. In your book, you say that when you're walking into, to go to the store, you cause traffic.
Yeah, that first town, that's one reason we had to move out of that town for sure, was because it's way off the beaten path. Nobody in that town had ever seen a foreigner before, and people would stare at us. Within 20 minutes, the entire town knew we were there.
Right. Yeah. Who? Her? Oh, I know exactly where she's at. Yeah, not helpful.
Not good.
No.
So, yeah, we moved to a bigger city where it would be a little bit easier. And in the bigger cities, there's a little bit more cultural diversity, too, so you don't stand out quite as much. There are fair-haired, light-skinned Mexicans, so...
when my partner and my wife now, traveled through Ecuador, I'm 6 foot tall, short haircut, big build. Ecuadorians are quite short in general. And so, when we walked by, people would just look and stare. And then the fact that same-sex partner, it's like so confusing. It's like mind blown. So it's a little intimidating, the look of bewilderment you get. And then, and all that attention. But to add to that, the fear that you're on the run and you don't want to be harmed or you don't want anything to happen to your mom. How much stress did that place on you growing up? Or were you able to sort of keep it at bay and just enjoy being a child?
Well, truly, once we kind of got past that initial getting used to being in Mexico and got out of that small town where we were extremely well known, it was, I think, a pretty normal, enjoyable childhood. We had we had a lot of friends. We would go out and play with them every day after school. We just kind of had a normal, as normal as you could under the circumstances, I guess, a pretty normal childhood. And it really wasn't that stressful once we got used to being down there. I think it would have been a lot worse, actually, in the U.S.
Right.
So, yeah, it was fine.
How long do you think it took to get used to it? The new culture, new food, new, all the new. Yeah.
I think I would say probably a year or two for my sister and me, maybe a little bit longer for my mom.
What do you think was the most difficult part for you as a child to adjust to the new culture?
Well, just initially being down there, having everybody stare at me was a completely new thing. Going to the marketplace, I was 8 years old. I didn't know what to expect, and to go to a place that's so completely different from everything I knew in the U.S. and go to the open air market and see, pig heads hanging from hooks in,
you describe that so well in your book. The whole pig heads and then the piles of like fish and beans, and it's just all in big piles. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And that was just, to me, that was really hard. And I actually got sick to my stomach because, not only are we not used to seeing that in the U.S., but I'm actually a vegetarian. So seeing these piles of dead fish and meat all over the place really grossed me out. And, I just whirled around and threw up right there in the middle of the marketplace. And then, of course, everybody's staring even more. I had this huge crowd of people looking at me. It was mortifying.
Yeah. My wife's also a vegetarian, and when we went to Ecuador, you know how they have open air markets like that where things are hanging, and she couldn't do it, and she was worried about losing her stomach content as well, so she had to wait like around the corner, and I was filming the open air market for like a tourist video, and so I'll be like, I'll be right back, you hang out here. It's I understand, yeah, especially for vegetarians. In the U.S., we distance ourselves from our food source. We sort of keep away the emotional ties, and we just have this culture. We keep it nice and neat. And there, it's like, nope, this is where it came from. Here it is, nice and fresh. There you go. We fan the flies away. Good to go. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And the other thing is, we could hear sometimes in the neighborhood, somebody would be butchering their pig or their chicken, and we could hear the sounds of the screaming animal. It's like, oh my God.
Wow. Okay. So that would be intense, especially
so that
for
was
a vegetarian.
hard, just getting used to that. But once we got used to it, it's fine. But at first, that was probably the most shocking and difficult thing for me.
Yeah, I can understand that. Now, how many years were you in Mexico?
We were there for a total of 5 years.
What made you guys move back? I think you moved back to the States. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. What spawned that?
Well, at this point, I was into my teens. My sister was approaching her teens, and my mom really felt like we needed to be back in our own culture, because at that point, for all practical purposes, my sister and I were Mexicans.
Right.
So she felt like she didn't want us to completely lose touch with our own culture. And I think she herself was just ready to be back in a place where, everybody understood her. Could all speak Spanish fluently at that point, but just get her as an American.
Right.
There's that cultural difference, and there's the stress of being different. So I think she was kind of ready for that, and she really was concerned that the two of us might have trouble ever readjusting to our own culture if she waited much longer. So that's kind of what made her decide. We didn't want to come back to the U.S. My sister and I were perfectly happy to stay down there. We had our friends, and we were just happy down there. We did eventually move back, and we were in the U.S. for another couple of years before we actually got caught. So,
Well, before we get to that story, do you feel that it was harder to come back to the U.S. and reintegrate, or harder to integrate into the Mexican culture?
I feel like coming back to the U.S. was actually harder. Reverse culture shock is worse than the initial culture shock. And I think there's several reasons for that. I think a big one is when you come back to your own country, you look like everybody around you. And they expect that you are like everybody around you, but inside you're a completely different person. You have a completely different perspective and a completely different history. You grew up watching completely different TV shows and singing completely different songs. So when you come back after growing up in another country and you really have nothing to relate to of everybody else, even though you speak their language and you look like them, you are not like them very much at all. And that's really difficult. We kind of discovered that when we first moved back. We moved to, very briefly, to El Paso. My mom kind of thought if we lived near the border that it would be maybe an easier transition, because there's a lot of both cultures there. But the level of crime in El Paso was just atrocious. So my mom thought, okay, this is not a safe place for us to be, and we moved up to Albuquerque. And so, in Albuquerque, I remember I was, starting to get to know other kids. And of course, all I talked about was, well, when we were in Mexico this, and when we were in Mexico that. And
right.
Not bragging or anything. It's just that was my history. I mean, just like, anybody would talk about the last school they went to or whatever.
Right.
I was just talking about my past. But a lot of the kids, and now, of course, at that point, I'm middle school age, which is a tough age anyway.
Brutal, yeah.
Yeah, it's a tough age. And so, a lot of the kids kind of look at me like, oh, you're, bragging that you speak Spanish and bragging that you lived in Mexico and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no, it's just who I am.
Right. It's the experience I have to share.
So,
right.
Yeah. And it was so painful to me to be kind of treated in that way and kind of rejected by the other kids that the next time we moved after that, I told my sister, we kind of made this pact that we would not tell any of the other kids anything about Mexico. We would not tell them that we spoke Spanish. And we just basically pretended that part of our life didn't exist.
Wow.
So, yeah, that was hard. That particular period in life was hard. Thankfully it didn't last forever. And,
right.
Now I feel I have no trouble talking about Mexico if people are interested. But that is very challenging coming back as a kid from another country and then not being able to freely talk about your past without being judged by other kids.
Yeah, and the amount of preconceived notions about what you should be like as a teenager here can be pretty intense. It's a different feel. I think Latin America has a much more hospitable environment for different types of people than we do in the U.S. in general.
Very much so, very much so.
Yeah, the expectation here is huge.
Yes.
I can't even imagine. I had the same experience, not the same, totally different. But like when I came back from living abroad for a few years, I thought it was harder to reintegrate here, even though I know what is accustomed to here. I guess because I think my heart resonated with different things abroad so strongly, it was hard to let go of that, the pace and just more of the family-centric and, just certain aspects that I really enjoyed about other countries. And then coming back to the U.S. and being flooded with entertainment from, you can't even go to a restaurant without having like 5 different TVs blaring. And,
yeah,
unless you're going to a real fancy place. But it's just overstimulation, and it's more simple elsewhere, and I think sometimes that is hard to just jump back into.
Yes, that's so true. And not only that, but in the other countries, you are the minority, and so it's kind of okay that you're different.
Right. Yeah.
And here you're expected to conform and be the same as everybody. Over there, you're already different because you're the foreigner, so it's okay if you're a little weird,
Yeah, and being gay abroad, like, in Costa Rica, almost everyone was super cool and excited about, like, me being different and supportive. In Ecuador, they're even more conservative, and so when they would decide they like my wife and I, but then when we would tell them, they're like, oh, you're not sisters? And we're like, no, pareja at the time. We were partners, and they were like, wait, I already chose to like you. Now I'm confused. Internal conflict. You can see the wheels moving. And then I tell you, they look up and they say, oh, you're American. It's okay if you're American. If you were Ecuadorian, it wouldn't be okay. That's what they told us. So it was a very interesting sentiment that sort of plays out what you just said,
Yes. Yeah. It's so true, though.
Yeah, super, super different how everyone decides to internalize and justify their beliefs, Yeah. Okay, so fast forwarding past Mexico and back in the U.S. in Albuquerque, what happened? Tell me the story about you guys getting caught.
Okay, there were kind of 2 different big things that happened. First of all, my mom got a job working as a caregiver for this elderly couple, taking care mostly of the lady. And while we were living at that house, the police showed up, and we were using aliases at the time. They asked for my mom, but they asked for her by her alias. I was the one that answered the door, and you can imagine how scared I was.
Right.
And so I ran into the other room where my mom was helping my sister with her homework, and I'm like, the police are here. They're asking for you. And we had already kind of arranged this plan where if the cops ever were to show up, my sister and I would try to get away and go to some friend's place or something. So my sister and I bolted out the back door and took off running. My mom went out and tried to stall the cops for as long as possible. And it was kind of obvious. I mean, it's still a bit of a mystery to this day how they knew we were there. And they obviously didn't know our whole story. They didn't know our legal names. So that's a little mystery of, I think somebody suspected something and called it in, but didn't know the whole story. I don't know.
Right.
So my mom was stalling them for a long time. Finally, some cops went in and started searching the house and noticed that my sister and I were gone.
Didn't she have a cute kid in here?
They were like, okay, where are the kids? And my mom's, honestly, she didn't know where we were.
The park? I don't know.
She's
They're
like,
playing.
I don't know. So they threw her into the back of they put handcuffs on her, threw her into the back of the police car and left her there. And then they were all combing the neighborhood, going door to door, searching for the two of us. So my mom, while she's sitting in the back of the car, slips out of the handcuffs. She's a tiny person. She's, she kind of folded her hands and slips off the handcuffs. They had left, it was in August, so it was really hot out, and they had left the window like halfway down. So she slips out of the handcuffs, crawls out the window of the car, and runs to a neighbor, and she's like, "Can I use your phone?"
Oh my gosh.
And so she called some friends of ours that we had trusted. There was, most of the time we did not tell people that we were hiding out because, word would get around.
Sure.
But there were a few people that we had trusted with our story. So she called one of those friends, and she says, the girls, the police are here. The girls took off. I'm not sure where they are. Can you please go find them? The cops have me. I don't know what's going to happen. And at that point, the cops come storming in the door. Now they're really mad because she escaped. So
she made him look bad.
Yeah.
So she get for putting someone in a car in Albuquerque in August without the AC.
Yeah, exactly. So, they were brutal. They were really brutal. And you hear about police brutality. My mom experienced it firsthand. So
I'm sorry to hear that.
Anyway, they grab the phone, yank it out of her hand, slam it down on the receiver, and take her back out. And then they put 3 sets of handcuffs on her, including one all the way up by her elbows, so her arms are bent way back. They dislocated her shoulder. They were, throwing her around and trying to get, threatening her, trying to get her to talk.
And they don't even know what the deal is at this point. They don't
even have a warrant or anything.
They didn't have a search warrant. They search her house. Yeah.
They have nothing. Right. And so, my mom says, "I'm not saying anything. I want to talk to my attorney."
Yeah.
So they it's really funny because it hadn't been too long before this. The timing was so perfect that my mom and my sister and I went to see an attorney, tell him our situation, and kind of get some legal advice because we were kind of searching for a way to end this and get it over with legally.
Right.
So we had been talking with an attorney there in Albuquerque about the situation, and we hadn't officially hired him or anything, but, we just did a free consultation with him. And at the end of the consultation, he gave his card to my mom and said, "If you ever need anything, give me a call." So the cops now, they have her and they're like, "Who's your attorney?" And my mom gave the name of this guy, and all of a sudden the handcuffs come off. They're like, "Well, you have a nice day." And they shook her hand. My mom's kind of going, "What in the world?" They all got in their cars and drove off.
Because she could sue them.
Exactly. Yeah. So, what turns out is this particular attorney, the main thing he was known for, and we didn't realize this at the time, but the main thing he was known for was finding little mistakes that the police had made, searching without a warrant and things like that, and getting cases thrown out.
Yeah.
So they knew that they were toast. Right. So they basically just left.
Wow.
But at that point, it's like, okay, they know too much. If something else comes up and they find out more about what's going on, then we're dead meat. So, So we moved again. We changed our names again. When we actually got caught is several months later. we were with a friend. It was my mom's boyfriend, actually, who is now my stepdad. And we were getting ready to go over to his house to watch a movie. It was a Friday afternoon. We were just winding down for the weekend. And he had come to our apartment complex, and his car was, out front. So we're all getting into the car, and all of a sudden, all these cars come in at the same time from different directions, completely blocking all the exits to this apartment complex. And I didn't know what was going on. I just thought they were all just regular cars. They weren't marked vehicles. And I thought, crazy drivers, that's kind of what a coincidence that they all came in at the same time. Now somebody's going to have to back up so we can get out of here.
Right.
But instead of, backing up and figuring it out, they stopped, all the cars stopped, and a man got out of each car and started walking toward us. I'm like, that's not good. So they went up to my mom and started talking to her, and they were speaking to her in a really low voice. I couldn't quite make out what they were saying. But I looked at one man's belt, and he had a badge on his belt. And I thought, oh, boy, I think they're cops or something. So I went over to my mom, and I said, what's going on? She's like, it's the FBI. We've been caught. It was like the Friday before Mother's Day, which was like, oh, man, my sister and I were devastated. We had made a homemade card for my mom, and we were all crying. And we gave her the Mother's Day card that we had made for her, and we could tell that the FBI agents did not want to be doing what they were doing. Right. They were basically just doing their job, but they didn't want to be. And they confirmed later. It's kind of funny because later on I contacted one of the FBI agents who had been in charge of our case, and he basically said that they didn't like my dad at all, and they were only doing this because my mom had broken the law and it was their job to do it, but they kind of felt like my mom was the innocent one. The FBI actually was, unlike the police who came several months earlier, the FBI were very gentle, kind of apologetic almost about having to break us up. And
how old were you and your sister at this point?
We were 12 and 14 at that point.
Too young to be emancipated, huh?
Yeah. So we ended up spending the next year and a half living with my dad. My mom went to jail.
How long did she have to stay in jail for?
She was sentenced to a year. What she had done was a felony, so she could have been sentenced to more than a year. But what they did was a plea bargain, and they turned it into a misdemeanor, a gross misdemeanor, which a maximum sentence is a year, and the judge gave her the maximum sentence. But she didn't spend the entire year in jail. She was there for about 5 months, and then because of her good behavior, they let her out early. So
good.
Yeah, she's obviously not jail material. She'd never even had a parking ticket before this. She was just trying to keep us safe.
Yeah, that's, okay, so, hearing this, I'm a big, advocate for justice, and it's one of my personality attributes where when you hear about or see, injustice behavior with someone you care about, like, I get angry. So did you hold a grudge or bitterness about how this system just completely did not serve your family? I mean, how did that affect you as a person? Well,
I think there's kind of a two-part answer to that. First of all, I would be lying if I didn't say I was a little bit cynical about our justice system, having experienced the way it works, or doesn't sometimes.
Sure.
It frustrates me, not only our case, but I've seen other people too, where they haven't really had, I thought, a just case in court. And that's unfortunate. It bothers me. On the other hand, I really have to say, I feel like I'm the luckiest person in the world, because this whole thing with going to Mexico and living down in Mexico is really the best thing that ever happened to me. And my life right now is so much better and so different than it would have ever been had I been left to live with my abusive father.
Right.
It just, I don't even know what I would be like now if that had happened. So, I think it's unfortunate that the legal system didn't really do its job in the beginning. But I think things turned out as well as they ever possibly could have. And I'm just thankful for how things happened. And I wouldn't trade my life for anything.
Well, it's a super mature and healthy way to look at it, and a good refocus from something bad that, you recognize exactly all the fruits it added to your life. It's, it's super great. I mean, I struggle with that. I hurt my back a while back, and that's what transitioned me from being a paramedic to being like location independent. And that was, the chronic pain I have every day is definitely a bummer. And I miss being a paramedic and a lot of different aspects of that job. But at the same time, it opened me up to have all of these experiences in different portions of the world and meet my wife. So there's like some super big pluses.
Yeah.
But,
yeah.
Not as big of a impact, I think, as your experience, but how I can relate to what you're saying.
Yeah, it's the same idea, though. I mean, I don't know if I would go so far as to say everything happens for a reason. I don't know if that's true or not, but it really seems that way sometimes. Like, even if things don't happen for a reason, we can make meaning out of what happens in our lives.
Right. You just got to look for it.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so now leaving the story, this awesome, amazing, different story that you have that shaped you into the person you are. As an adult, you became a Spanish teacher, you married a dude named Keith, and you set out to be like more location independent. So tell me what led you through this new path.
Yeah. So many long stories. It's hard to.
I know, right? Just go ahead and tell me your whole life story. No problem. Just.
But yeah, I did go to college and became a teacher. And I started out as an elementary teacher and discovered that I love to teach, but elementary teaching wasn't my thing. I transitioned to teaching college and then later on to teaching adults in professional settings. And I was teaching Spanish. Loved it. And then I also had a job for a while working for the state of Colorado as an inspector of childcare facilities. And throughout this time, in this kind of college and career portion of my life, I was still moving quite a bit, but I was obviously a lot more stable than I had been when we lived the fugitive lifestyle. And the longest I ever lived in one place was 3.5 years. And while I was living there, I met Keith. And he, at the time, he's kind of got a little bit of a backstory too, but he went to college to become a pilot. He wanted to be an airline pilot and travel. His dream was to be a traveler. And so he graduated with this degree in aeronautical science with flight, took a job as a flight instructor to get started. And that day that he started working as a flight instructor was September 10th, 2001.
Oh.
And he was supposed to have his first flight student on 9/11.
Wow.
So that was really a really bummer time to get into that field.
Yeah. Things changed a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, that didn't work out too well. So he did work as a flight instructor for a while, but he found that his backup skill, what he had supported himself through college as, was as an electrician. And that was actually bringing in more money than work as a pilot. And then he discovered contract work, where he works on these really big jobs. He does commercial and industrial electrical work. So he works on huge construction projects that require tons of people. And then when they're done, and you move on. So we are in a place for 3 to 6 months while he works on a project. And then we move on to another project, or we take some time to travel. So that's what he was doing at the time I met him. He was on a project in the town where I lived.
And did he mostly jump around in the U.S., or was this an international endeavor?
It was semi-international. He was working in the U.S. most of the time, but he was also working seasons down in Antarctica at the South Pole Station.
Wow, that would be amazing. But
yes.
To get back to logistics real quick before we get into some amazing travel experiences, did you guys rent like a furnished apartment? Was that like supplied by his job, or how did that work in the U.S.? That can be really difficult.
Yeah, that can be hard, especially when you're traveling with a cat, which is what we do. So,
okay. All right.
Yeah, for a while we were doing, we would go to a place, we'd find a pet-friendly hotel and make that our base while I would spend the next several days house hunting full time for a place that would allow us to rent month to month, or at least a really short term lease, and have a cat, which was very hard to do. And we did a lot of things like, folding chairs, folding table,
Sure,
that kind of thing, air mattress.
Yeah,
but we got by, and now we have a motorhome. So
there you go.
So much easier now. So much easier.
Yeah, that sounds ideal. That sounds ideal. So is that what you guys are doing now? Is still bouncing around based on different work projects?
Yeah, for the most part, Keith is still doing the same thing. He's on a job right now. We're in the U.S. and he's working on a big construction project right now. And we're living in a motorhome. And so we do that. And then between those jobs, then we take several months at a time, usually 3 to 6 months a year, or usually more like 4 to 6 months a year, and just travel. And actually last year, Keith only worked 3 months out of the whole year. Fantastic.
And so how does he get his leads? Since he's an independent contractor, is that how I understand that? He has his own
pretty
business,
much.
Basically?
Yeah, pretty much. He doesn't, it's not really his own business, but he works for other companies who... they might be temp agencies or they might be actual electrical companies, but he just finds out where the jobs are, calls the companies that are working on those jobs, and says, hey, I'm a licensed electrician. I have my journeyman and master's license in these states. And typically within a couple of days, there is a high demand for his skill set. So he has no trouble when he's ready to find a job. He just makes a few phone calls and he's got a job.
Wow, that's amazing.
So
that's
amazing.
Nice. I'll have to add that profession to my list of jobs that are location independent friendly because it was off my radar before this interview. I got to be honest.
Yeah, well, and it's not obviously you have to be in the location in order to do the work, but
right. I guess that wasn't the proper term. Yeah,
but between jobs though, you have a lot of freedom. So
yeah, and in the jobs you take, you can go to a different place each time. Not necessarily you're going to walk into whatever city you want to go to and get a job, but you don't stay in one place in a stagnant way.
Right. Yeah. No, we're moving a lot. Every 3 to 6 months, like I say, we're picking up and moving on to another place. So some of the places that we've lived in have been pretty fun, and other places have been really not that fun at all. So how it's just where the best work is.
Yeah. Are you getting tired of picking up? I know everyone's different and everyone has a different intrinsic pace. Do you have enough time off to refresh you from all the, pick up and go?
In general, yes. It's pretty brutal while we are working because Keith finds jobs he prefers to work as many hours as possible. He tries to get jobs where they're working 7 days a week, 10 to 12 hours a day if he can. And because the overtime is so good.
Right.
And then we also get per diem when he's on these jobs. So that's how we're able to save up for the travel that we do. And typically we are able to travel enough that it makes it worth it. I do have to say, though, that toughest part of this type of lifestyle is not having a consistent social life.
Yeah. And
we don't have, a set of friends that we can just go back to and pick up where we left off. The friends that we do have are from our more stable portions of life, and they're scattered all over the country. And, his are mostly on the East Coast and mine are mostly on the West Coast. And
right.
So, we have good friends, but we don't see them very often. And it's kind of hard to have that thing where you just go hang out with friends when you're moving every 3 to 6 months.
Right. And then when you're, at the house, I'm not sure exactly, it's got to feel lonely, if he's gone 10 hours a day or what have you.
Yeah,
and you're
in a bad
area.
I stay pretty busy with my writing. And, that's kind of what I do is I don't teach anymore, although I have thought about starting up some online teaching. But I do a lot of writing, and it's kind of an ideal situation while he's gone because I don't have any interruptions. I can just sit and get into the flow and do some writing that way, which is good for work.
Yeah, it sounds like you guys really complement each other well.
We do. It's good. And because he does work such long hours, I try to take care of everything else. I mean, when he's not working, we kind of split up the responsibilities around the house and so forth. But when he is working, I try to do everything so that he can just focus on bringing in the money and then coming home and getting some rest and then going back to work again.
Right.
So,
well, it sounds like a fantastic setup. Now, you had mentioned one of his gigs was down in Antarctica.
Yes.
How long were you guys down there?
Well, he's been down there 5 times for the summer seasons, which is about, at the South Pole Station, it's about 3.5 months each time. And the last time I went down with him, and you can't go down unless you're working. You can't just go down with a spouse and hang out. So I had a job down there as a dishwasher. And so, he obviously worked as an electrician, and I was washing dishes, but that was an amazing experience working down at the South Pole.
How would you describe it? You know, most people haven't been, so.
Yes, yeah. Well, obviously, as you might imagine, it's cold down there, so.
Right.
You don't go outside a whole lot. When you do, you want to be sure to dress up in very warm clothing for it. And the U.S. Antarctic program has a big Antarctic center in Christchurch, New Zealand, where on your way down, they will give you all of the gear that you need, the extreme cold weather gear that you need down there. When you're actually at a station, the buildings are heated and everything, so it's just like being inside a building in the winter anywhere else in the world. It's you just wear normal clothes. So to pack up and go down there, just take whatever you would normally take with you on a long trip. You know, it's just some changes of clothes, your computer, some books to read, whatever you want. And as far as any specialized equipment, they will provide all of that. Inside, it's a huge building. The South Pole Station, I wish I knew off the top of my head how many thousand square feet it is, but it's a really good-sized building with basically 4 wings on it, and the one wing is like a big gym recreation area, and then the other 3 wings are berths with 150 beds. So there's like 150 little rooms, tiny little rooms that people have. And for people that go down as a couple, they have some of the rooms have a wall that's removable between them,
like a
so that you
style.
You can just remove that center wall and combine 2 rooms for couples. So people that go down with a spouse or a partner have that set up there.
I know you go down there to work, but is there any recreation? Like, do you have any ability to enjoy the outdoors? I know it's hard to enjoy when it's like the weather will kill you, but to look up at the stars or whatever.
Yeah. Well, in the summer season, it's sunlight 24 hours a day, so you will never see stars. But and in the winter, it's the opposite. You'll see stars all the time. But we were there for the summer season, so the sun just goes in circles all day long, and you want to be sure and block the windows really good so that you can sleep. There are lots of social activities when you're not. Basically, everybody works 60 hours a week, 6 10-hour days, and then on our evenings and days off, we just, there's all kinds of fun things that people do. I mean, people who speak other languages will start language clubs. My husband used to be the president of the dance association in college, so he was teaching swing dance classes.
Oh, cool.
We have sporting events. We have game nights. We have Scrabble tournaments and carnivals and dances and all kinds of
idea.
things.
Well, I just pictured someone like coming back to the U.S. and being like, "Hey, what'd you learn in Antarctica? Oh man, I learned how to swing dance in Antarctica."
But that's what several people now have learned to swing dance in Antarctica.
That's awesome. I would have never known that. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it is a lot of fun. I think I describe it as like being at a summer camp where you've got all these fun activities. And so when you're not working, it is a blast. It is so much fun down there. And as far as outdoor activities, they do have cross-country skis that you can check out and a cross-country ski track. But the snow down there is super hard. It's really not that fun to ski on.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, I don't really have much snow experience, but I was curious about that. If they had I don't really know what you do out there. That's why normally travelers are pretty outdoorsy type people. So I was kind of curious, what keeps you from getting room fever or what have you. But yeah, sounds like you guys got that covered.
Yeah, and I think one of the most amazing things about being down there, about half the staff there are scientists doing research, and about half are the support crew. And obviously we were the support crew, but we get to speak with a scientist about the different activities that they're doing. So that was really fun. It's like being on this really amazing field trip where you're going and seeing these world-class science experiments being conducted.
Yeah.
There's all different kinds of things going on down there, but the main areas, I guess, are astrophysics, cosmology type stuff, where they're studying the cosmic microwave background and the beginnings of the universe. And then there's also the Atmospheric Research Observatory, where they're studying air quality and the level of carbon in the atmosphere and that sort of thing. So
important stuff.
And then there's other things. Yeah. Yeah. It's just fun every evening you can sit at the table and ask the scientists what they're discovering, and they're excited to talk about their work, and you can go out to their telescopes or whatever, and they'll show you around. It's just a lot of fun.
Yeah. And you're supporting them. So you're a part of it. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. It's a privilege really to be able to go down there. It's like, I wash dishes for the guys that discovered the...
I wash dishes for 60 hours and my hands are so soft. No.
Actually, I got a really bad rash.
Did you?
That's another story. Yeah.
So, okay, Antarctica sounds pretty awesome. Now, share with me some of your other favorite experiences from your, periodic travels that you've done over the last many years.
Okay, yeah. Well, we've been to all the continents now except for Asia. That's the one place we haven't gotten to yet, so we're thinking about maybe doing that next. But some of the highlights, there's so many stories and fun things, but some of the highlights were our honeymoon. We went to Mount Kilimanjaro and hiked that for our honeymoon. That was a blast. And then we went on safari after that. Work at the South Pole is obviously a big, big highlight. After the South Pole period, then we went to, on the way back, we stopped in New Zealand for 6 weeks and just did some trekking, hut to hut hiking and exploring different parts. We spent the whole time on the South Island. So
I was just about to ask, did you base out at Christchurch and then go down?
Yeah, basically we left our most of our luggage at the Antarctic Center in Christchurch and just packed a couple of carry-ons and just rode the bus from place to place, and then stopped and went hiking. And a few times we went hiking, through a mountain range and down to a different city, and then picked up the bus from there. And it basically just made the circle of the whole South Island.
So it's funny, I did a circle of the North Island. So if we get combined experiences, we'd be like, well, I don't know if you've done the
New Zealand book.
I know, because I love New Zealand. I'm not going to lie. It's my number one favorite country. If it was affordable, that's where I would be podcasting from right now.
It is awesome.
It is so expensive, but everyone is so happy.
Is crap there.
Yeah, I don't know about the South Island. I can't, and I don't remember about the North Island, to be quite honest. I don't remember having a large amount of difficulty, at least compared to Peru or anything like that. But that's interesting. I wonder if it's just, the South Island has a lot more, fjords and more, natural assets, so less. Actually, I'm just sort of making stuff up. I don't know why they might be different. I do that sometimes. I like to just sound authoritative and this makes sense. But I loved New Zealand. Did you have the same experience?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's almost like everybody is so trusting and trustworthy and friendly and
happy.
Yes. Yeah. And helpful. That you look vaguely like you might be looking for something or struggling a little bit, and somebody will stop and say, "Is there anything I can help you with?" It's just so helpful and friendly and, obviously an extremely easy place for somebody who doesn't speak another language because they speak English there. So
A beautiful English. Yeah.
Just,
I like
and
accent.
way more than their fair share of beauty. Way more than their fair.
Right. And with their culture, 4 to 6 weeks off is an average beginning vacation time. I'm like, that's why they're happy.
Exactly.
But
yeah.
it's fantastic. I just wish I could, stay there a little bit more. Maybe later in life I'll be there more, but I definitely enjoyed the people there. I was in a surfer van, the little Kiwi vans they have all over there. Yeah, and I remember parking in front of this gorgeous beach, and you can do that overnight there. There's not all the rules like some of the beaches here. And this coffee shop owner, I was in there, it's like a mom and pop coffee shop. They go, oh, I can leave my bathrooms open for you. They had an outdoor bathroom facility, and I'll just leave it unlocked so you can use it if you're camping there,
Nice.
Well, yeah, I'm like, you guys are awesome. I'm in love with you New Zealanders.
Yeah.
Go Kiwis.
Yeah, they are great. It's funny. We got done hiking one of the long hikes that we did, and there alongside a road, there's this little fruit stand where they're selling apples, and there's this basket of apples and a basket of money right next to the apples. And there's a sign that says, how much the apples are. And they say, just leave your money in the thing and take the apple. No concern that people might run off with all their apples and their money.
Right.
It's just like, wow.
Yeah.
That couldn't happen in very many places.
No, in a lot of places that can't even happen in a work environment. You put a fridge and like Cokes and here, put this much. You can't even get away with that in, where everyone knows each other.
Exactly.
That's insane. I love it. That's a great story to illustrate their personality.
Yes.
Yeah. So what would you say has been like your favorite all-around country? And I know that's miserably impossible to answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Well, New Zealand was pretty special, but I think the place that I really have, I don't know. Mexico obviously holds a huge spot in my heart because that's like home to me. But I have to say I really, really liked Ecuador. There's several reasons for that. It's a beautiful country. It's small, but it has a lot of diversity in it as far as, it's got the coast, it's got the Galapagos Islands, it's got the beautiful, majestic Andes Mountains, and then the Amazon basin and the jungle atmosphere. So you've got all of that in this little country. The people are super friendly, and I felt really safe there. I can see myself, of all the countries in the world where I think I could settle down and actually use those words, settle down.
Right.
I think that's one of the few places I could say I could see myself doing that there.
Well, that brings us full circle to your book. You obviously have a lot of experience with Loja. Why did you guys decide to go to Ecuador in the first place? Why Loja, and how long were you there?
Well, we actually weren't there too terribly long, surprisingly. I had been to Ecuador about 6 years earlier, just on a trip to the Galapagos Islands. So I really felt like I wanted to come back and get to know the mainland. And my husband had never been to South America at all. So we decided, we were thinking about South America in general, like maybe, Southern South America versus Chile versus, we were looking at different areas and trying to decide where to go, but we wanted to do a slow travel thing. We wanted to pick one place and just really get to know it well. And, after discussing it, we're like, you know what, let's do Ecuador. We'd heard enough about it from different people that it just sounded like it's an affordable place, which was important because we were trying to save money. And it sounded like the people were going to be friendly. And based on my experience there several years earlier, I was really intrigued and I wanted to learn more. So that's why we picked Ecuador. And then once we had selected Ecuador, then I started doing the research on the different regions of Ecuador and trying to decide where to base ourselves out of. And, you read the main city in Ecuador that has all the information about it is Cuenca. Everybody knows about Cuenca.
Everyone knows, yep.
And so I thought, well, it sounds like a nice city, but there was just something, the fact that it has a huge expat population was a little bit of a turnoff to me, to be honest, because I want to get to know the local culture and interact with the local people without kind of this expectation that I'm going to want to go hang out with my own people thing. And so I was looking at other options, and we had also heard a lot about Vilcabamba.
Right.
And I thought, well, Vilcabamba sounds like a really charming little town. And then we read about Loja, and there really wasn't that much information at all about it. But from what I did read, I could see that there were some universities there, that it had a symphony, which I love going to live symphony performances, and that there were very few expats there, and that it was a little bit warmer than Cuenca. I thought, well, that sounds like a good place to maybe base ourselves from. So that we just decided we didn't know how we would go about getting a place or anything, because I couldn't find anything online. I thought, well, you know what? We already speak Spanish. So, and that's my husband actually speaks Spanish as well. So
great.
That's convenient.
Yeah.
And I said, so let's just go there and we'll figure it out when we get there.
Well, Loja's definitely up and coming. That whole region definitely is. When I was doing the research for the Becoming an Expat Ecuador edition, it's definitely popping up more, and we covered it because of that, and because of what you're saying, basically the amazing assets it has with the symphony and the natural assets as well. What were your favorite parts about living there?
Oh, there were several things that I really felt were special about Loja. Number one is the people. The Lojanos are just super friendly. I know they are in a lot of Ecuador, but I felt like in some parts of Ecuador, namely Cuenca and Vilcabamba, there's just a little bit of a rift between the expats and the locals. And that's not there yet in Loja. Loja is very welcoming, very accepting. We were just treated as if we were one of them. They just welcomed us as one of their own. They didn't give us higher prices because we were foreigners or anything like that. We were treated very fairly. So that was probably my favorite thing about Loja. I think right behind that is just the natural beauty of the place, the surroundings, the mountains around there, the Policarpus National Park, just the ability to go outside of the city in pretty much any direction and go for a nice hike up into the mountains, which we did on numerous occasions on all sides of the city. And
even when you ran into the military crew.
Yeah,
that was awesome. In her book, she talks about hiking and all the different activities. In fact, if you're interested in Loja, she mentions all the different things, wonderful things there is to do there. But tell us that story about encountering the military. Okay,
so we were walking along this dirt road heading out of town in a certain direction, and these school buses were going by as we're walking along. And so we figured there was a school somewhere up ahead. And as we're going along, we noticed off to our left, there's a trail that kind of just goes off into the woods. So we said, there's a trail. Let's go hike it, explore it, see where it goes. So we get off the road and start following this trail. And we go through the woods for a little ways, and we come out onto another little road. I thought, okay, well, here's another road. So we started following this road. And we're going down the road, and we come across we see this building off to our right. And it looks like a school building at first glance. Like, there's that. That must be the school that all the buses are going to.
Yeah.
And so we're walking along, and all of a sudden, we get past the side of the building, and on the other side of the building, there's all these military guys standing in formation, and they're all facing us. They're all facing the road, and their sergeant has his back to us, right? So their sergeant's doing their drill and everything, and all the guys, all of a sudden, they start pointing toward us. And so the sergeant turns around and starts yelling, and some other guy comes running toward us. He's like, "What are you doing here?" And we're like, "We're just out hiking." Like, "You're not supposed to be here. Didn't you see the signs?" And we said, "No, we just came down the trail and came out on this road. We didn't see any signs."
Yeah.
Apparently the signs were on the road and we had bypassed the road. So.
Right.
Anyway, we're like, "We're really sorry." He's like, oh, well, where are you trying to go? And it's like, well, we're just out exploring, but, we were kind of hoping to see if the road looped around back to town. He's like, well, I'll show you how to get to town. And he marches us across the grounds. And while he's taking us along, he starts pointing out these different things like, oh, those mountains up there, we call those
the tour guide.
That's the sleeping Indian. And he tells us a little bit of the history and blah, blah, blah.
Wow.
And he's obviously really enjoying himself, kind of showing us around. And then he gets us to the gate and he says, well, you just follow that road down and you'll get back into town. You have a nice day. And that was that.
Wow. That could have gone very differently in other places.
It could have been bad, but
yeah, that's hospitality. Fantastic. Have a great day. Hope you enjoyed your tour.
Just don't come back.
Right. I think you might get a different vibe if that were to happen. That's fantastic. So I've heard time and time again expats say, oh, you don't need to learn Spanish to go and move to Ecuador, to Costa Rica, to, these different countries, Panama. Some people speak Spanish. You can get by, make gestures with your arms. What do you feel about that?
I feel that people who say that are doing a huge disservice, not only to the people in the neighborhoods they're choosing to live in, but to themselves, because if you can't speak the language and communicate with the locals, the locals will resent you. Mm-hmm. I've heard this time and time again with conversations with the locals. Their number one frustration is with people who move down there and then won't learn to speak Spanish. Mm-hmm. And they may be very nice to your face, mm-hmm. but, when you're not around, they're speaking negatively about that. They resent it. Mm-hmm. So there's that. If you don't speak the language, you're more likely to be taken advantage of. They're more likely to be tempted to charge you higher prices for things. You're not going to be able to develop friendships if you can't communicate with the people. And if you're in another country, you're missing out on a huge, huge positive experience by not making friends with the locals. Mm-hmm. So, I think it's okay if you're just traveling to maybe not learn more than just the basics of greetings and maybe a few numbers to get by.
Right.
But if you choose to live in a place, how many Americans have you heard complain about the Mexicans that come to the U.S. and refuse to learn English?
Right.
It's the same thing when, we move to another country and refuse to learn the language of that country. I think it's just a common courtesy to, if you choose to make a place your home, then you need to learn the language and the customs of that place.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I figured we had the same opinion on the matter after reading your book and your background in Spanish. But so it's kind of a loaded question to get you to prove what I think is correct. But how do you have a full experience of a culture and a new land that you're trying to explore if you can't communicate and understand? Communication is just the basic of the culture. I don't know how.
You're just setting yourself up for immense amounts of frustration if you can't communicate, in basic interactions,
Mm-hmm. Well, and then here's my other frustration. Gringos who, come to another state or another country and then say, well, English is a universal state. Everyone should speak English. How arrogant, is that? Mm-hmm. And that frustrates me because, as you mentioned, the more expats an area receives, the culture and the way that gringos are treated sort of shifts. And I believe that, to be our fault as I'm stereotyping gringos, of course, but
they're not all this way.
They're not all like this, but at the risk of sounding like a gringo basher or myself basher, I see people who kind of blow it for us, who treat people in their, locals, they treat them as subservients. They don't try to learn the language, and they're rude, and they don't try to understand the culture. They just say, well, this is just my cheaper version of the U.S., and that is going to wear on the locals, and they're going to, these people aren't nice. They're not treating us the way, we opened our arms to them. They're raising our prices. These things are shifting. And so what we're finding, or at least what I've noticed and what you commented on was, you can see the hospitable nature sort of get, a lampshade on it or kind of diminished a bit because I think of the behavior of the visitor.
Yes. And it's so true. It's almost like once it reaches a certain tipping point with the number of expats in a particular area, then it's a downward spiral of resentment between the locals and the expats. I mean, the expats may not be making much of an effort to learn the local culture and the local language, and so they do things that the locals find offensive, and then the locals start to resent them, and then maybe the locals start charging them higher prices or whatever, and it just starts turning into this negative cycle where they don't trust each other and they don't work together anymore, and it loses the charm that it had at the beginning. The reason people began to move there in the first place eventually gets spoiled.
Which is why it's so important to learn the language and make those individual relationships to show that you respect and want to be part of their lives.
Absolutely. And I think it makes all the difference. Even if you are living in an area where there is a large English-speaking population, it still pays to learn the language because, if you can reach out to the locals and speak to them in their own language and show them that you're not like those that don't speak their language, then they're going to be more likely to develop friendships with you and accept you and be protective of you in situations where you might be in danger or that sort of thing. They're going to care about you in a way that they're not going to care about the people that treat them like dirt, And
the protective nature strikes me too, because that's one of the things that popped in my head. I remember the first time I moved abroad, I was on this very empty beach and by myself. I hadn't met my wife yet, and I'd walk the beach every morning, and I thought, not a soul knows me here, and not a soul knows me if I would disappear. You know what I mean? At home, and there's no one really keeping tabs on me. So anytime I saw someone, usually it was a local fisherman, just had the fish line almost like a lasso, with the hook and a little snail on the end or whatever, and that's how they fish. And so I would talk to them. I'd wade in the water and I'd just sort of talk to them for a bit, and their Spanish was harder for me to understand, just like kind of going into the country and understanding English. Sometimes you're not going to really understand it. But I had a good time. They always smiled. We had a good interaction. And so everyone on the beach, the morning crew kind of knew me. And I kind of felt like, at least if there was someone that didn't belong on the beach, and was up to something mischievous, I think that these people would know, hey, you don't mess with her. She's one of ours,
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
And they do. I mean, they really protect people that, if they see somebody in trouble, they will reach out and protect you. And, if they see you doing something, just one example, when we were in Guayaquil, right after we landed in Ecuador, we hadn't even gone up to Loja yet. We were just exploring Guayaquil, walking around, and there are some areas of Guayaquil, it's known as being a more dangerous city.
Yeah.
And we were walking around the Malecón area. We just decided to start walking past that, and a local man said, "No, don't go that way. It's dangerous that direction. Go back that way." And they will do that. They will watch out for you and make sure that they don't want anything bad to happen to you.
Yeah, that's fantastic. We're talking a lot about Spanish. Your website has a lot of resources, how to learn Spanish and how to work on it, and sort of a guide, and then also in your book. One of the tips that you have in your book was to learn some communication strategies for controlling the conversation so you could understand what they're saying better. I found that very insightful. I don't know, I'd love to hear an example of that, because I know the problem you're talking about, where you start a conversation, then boom, Mach 10, you don't know what they're saying, and you're like, wow, they must have thought my Spanish was way better than it is.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
And I encourage people to start speaking Spanish as soon as they possibly can. I mean, even if you only know a few words, use what you know, because the more you speak, the more you're going to learn.
Right.
But the downfall of that is you might say something that you do know how to say, and then the Spanish speaker that you're speaking to assumes that you know more than that, and then they just take off.
Right.
So what you need to do, especially if it's an important situation where you really need to understand what they're saying, is to, first of all, stick with yes-no questions. That's one thing. And then if they try to give you a bigger answer than that, say something like respond with yes or no. Just learn a few phrases that will direct them to speak in a certain way. Speak more slowly, please, is one of them. So they start rattling off, and you feel like maybe you could catch it if they would just slow down a little bit.
Right.
So learning how to say, speak more slowly, please. Can you repeat that, please? answer with yes or no. You know, if you've asked a yes, no question, and they try to tell you a story, just say, can you please answer with yes or no? I don't understand. And, you know, so things like that kind of help to control the conversation in a way that you can interact. You kind of know what they're saying, and, you know, you can kind of have a little bit of back and forth, even though you might not be able to speak fluently yet.
Right. And, you know, one thing I've done when it's really important that I get it right, if it's a business transaction or if it's like fixing my car or my health, I got real sick in Peru. They'll tell me maybe instructions for medication use, and I'll say, okay, entonces, like, okay, so what you're saying, and then I'll say it back to them in my Spanish, and then they'll say, yep, you got it, or no, that's completely wrong, you know?
Yep, so, that's a good strategy too, just to make sure you understand.
Yeah, the hard part is when they don't just say yes or no to, like, did I get it right or not? And they're like, they just start talking more, and they're like, okay, wait, was that right? You know? Yeah, that can be tricky. Fantastic.
Yes.
Well, I don't want to keep you all day long, although I'm having a fantastic time talking to you. I have 2 more questions for you.
Okay.
If you could do it all over again, what would you change? Anything?
Anything about the Ecuador trip, or anything about anything in my life, or what?
Yeah, right. Yeah, super easy. With your background, I could go any direction with this. Let's talk about how you've shaped your life right now to being on the go every 3 to 4 months and traveling maybe half the year, you know, in that lifestyle that you have. If you could change anything or prepare a different way or go a different direction, would you do it?
I think the thing that I would like to do at this point, given, you know, the challenge that I alluded to earlier of having a consistent social life, I think that's the most difficult part for me. And I think the one thing that I would change is we are seriously thinking about getting some property, or at least doing a long-term rental. Loja is kind of at the top of our list of places that we're looking at, and going back there every year for at least several months out of the year, even if we do continue to travel and continue to work the way we are, just having a home base that we touch down on a consistent basis to develop those friendships. That's probably the one thing I would change about the way my life is right now.
You see that trend quite a bit. I think that's just the humanity in us. You know, we need that constant human connection. And, you know, I've transitioned that as well. I now have a home base in Bend, Oregon. And Nomadic Matt is semi-nomadic right now. You know, he's getting a home base. Nora Dunn, you know, the professional hobo.
She's down in Peru.
Yep. And that's just, I just think that it's a natural transition. And everyone has a different pace and need and thing like that. But I totally, you know, respect that. And it makes a lot of sense. And us travelers, you know, there's something in us. We're always going to be traveling and exploring, but that takes on different shapes and sizes.
Yeah, and I really feel like community is an important thing, and that is the one thing that's hard to do when you're on the move all the time. But, you know, that being said, I love my life, and I really do enjoy being nomadic. I would just add a little bit of a small component of stability to that. I'm not ready to settle down by any means. But,
sure. Those are curse words to you, aren't they?
Exactly.
Because that's what you get from everyone. When are you guys going to settle down? It's like, come on. When are you going to understand my lifestyle?
Yeah, I absolutely hate that. But I do want to have some good friendships and people that I can go back and hang out with on a regular basis. So.
Sure. That makes sense. And then the last question is, what advice do you have for folks that might be looking to live more, you know, location independently or nomadic or just a little bit more like your lifestyle? What advice do you have for them?
Well, I think that it pays to get started as soon as possible. I mean, a lot of people say, oh, you know, I wish I could do what you're doing. That's so cool. Someday I'm going to do that. And, you know, when is someday going to happen? When is that going to be? I would say my advice would be start taking steps right now to figure out how to make that happen. And there's never going to be a perfect time. If you want to live that kind of a lifestyle, you need to design your life in such a way that you can do it. And so instead of saying, I wish I could, ask yourself, how can I? And start actively seeking, answers to that question.
That's great advice. I know a lot of us out in this type of lifestyle have blogs and different resources for people to learn how to take those steps. I know your book, Live Like a Local in Loja, has a lot of different suggestions, and it shares with the reader what it's like to live there, so you can see if it's a good fit and things like that. And then, of course, I'll have the other resources on our show notes at nomadictales.com, as well as Becoming an Expat, because this interview does sort of overlap in both specialties, I guess you could say, since you did, you're nomadic in that you haven't had a home base and you constantly are on the go, but you stay put long enough to see, the local implications of what the culture's like, and you don't just have the tourist travel goggles on.
Yeah. And I'd love to offer a discount to your listeners to my book.
Oh, that'd be great.
So if your listeners just want to go to my website, lilianfouts.com/nomadic tales, I'll put a discount code there for people who want to order Live Like a Local in Loja.
That's very generous of you. I'm sure that would be great, for them to get the discount. And of course, your book's worth every penny. So,
yeah, I think it's valuable, even if people are considering moving to anywhere in Latin America, because there are so many other aspects to language and culture in that book besides just Loja. So
right. Well, thank you so much, Lily, for joining us. I had a great time talking to you, as you could see, since we're going over the average podcast length. I could not cut this one off. Thank you so much for your time and all your valuable information.
Oh, thank you. It's been my pleasure. It's fun.
All right, take care.
Bye.
You've been listening to Becoming an Expat. We'd like to hear from you. Email us your questions and share your stories about taking the leap into your new life abroad.
Are you tired of the daily grind or living for the weekends? Why put up with the life you dread? Learn how to live your life another way today. In our academy, you'll learn how to live life on your terms, what environment makes you thrive, and become the best you possible. We even teach you how to start a freedom business you can take with you while you travel the world. For those that like their deep roots, you'll learn how to retrain your brain to accomplish what you never knew possible from your hometown. So if you're at a crossroad in life and don't know which way to go or need to make a change, sign up for access to all of our courses at www.lifeanotherway.com. Hurry, because as we add courses, the one-time fee will increase. One enrollment fee, endless adventurous living.